Welcome, I'm Nina Griffin, and this is the Astrology and Magic channel. Today, we'll talk about the astrology forecast of May 2022. First, I wanted to say thank you to all of my patrons. I appreciate all of your support, all of your encouragement. If you would like to become a patron, you can go to patreon.com/Nina Griffin, and you can get access to my astrological and magical videos early, and in some cases, you can get access to exclusive materials. At the highest tier of the Patreon, you can get my monthly ebook on magical elections, which tells you how to make planetary talismans and when, of course. Okay, let's get started. So the key themes in May are that we're going to be going through another very important month. We're going to shift to a very different focus in May than we've had since about December 2021, when Jupiter entered Pisces for good. The last 6 months or so felt like its own separate volume, and will feel like that volume is pretty much closed and we can move on until about mid-November, when Jupiter will enter Pisces for a few more weeks as a final goodbye. We also have an eclipse in Scorpio this month. It's a lunar eclipse, and it feels much more serious yet controlled compared to the much more exuberant, in some ways, April 30th eclipse. The May 15th eclipse feels much more like sitting down to business and bringing one's full power to bear upon a situation. Now you have mom and dad's undivided attention. Whether that's good or bad, you decide. Now, to recap April, this was one of the most astrologically action-packed months of 2022. It's a bit hard to believe given everything that had already happened this year prior to April, but we had our Mars-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius, and an excellent aspect, Venus conjoining Jupiter in Pisces, followed by a solar eclipse on April 30th. There was definitely kind of a strong seesaw effect with some of the toughest aspects, including Mars conjoining Saturn, coming in early that month. And then later in the month is when we have Venus conjoining Jupiter and the very positive, in many ways, eclipse. What's also interesting is that in April, Mars conjoined the midheaven of the Aries ingress chart set for Washington, D.C. This was exact April 18th. What's interesting is that the couple of days leading up to this transit, the U.S. had, unfortunately, 3 separate mass shootings. The exact day of April 18th, a federal judge in Florida stopped enforcement of mask requirements in many U.S. public spaces and U.S. transportation. So you can see how Mars riding across the midheaven of the Aries ingress can indicate specific events pertaining to a particular country. Now let's talk about May. The first week of May, we start out with a bang. May 2nd, Venus enters Aries. Now this is a dramatic fall in dignity for Venus, who previously enjoyed about a month in Pisces, the sign of her exaltation, and of course she also got to conjoin Jupiter while she was there as well. Now she enters the sign of her detriment, and sometimes this can indicate a public shaming or loss of status for a Venusian person like a woman. It's certainly not a good period for Venus talismans. We want to make those when Venus is very strong, not in the sign of her detriment. Now, May 5th, the Sun will conjoin Uranus at 14 Taurus. Sometimes this conjunction can indicate a shocking event that becomes widely known because of the influence of the Sun, which reveals all. The 2019 terrorist attacks in Sri Lanka on Easter happened Easter Sunday, one day before the Sun conjoined Uranus in Taurus. I will say that this conjunction is usually not quite this drastic, but it can correspond to a collectively intense surprise event. Now, May 8th and 9th, Mars will conjoin Aries ingress Mercury and Jupiter. And this is true worldwide because the Aries ingress planetary positions are the same in every country in the world, so it could manifest anywhere in the world. This transit will add energy and conflict to communications and commerce as well, because, of course, those are ruled by Mercury. Jupiter, of course, has to do with big money and big deals and the wealthy. This transit could also activate the earthquake potential in the Aries ingress, which I had mentioned several times. Certainly, Mars transits have done this before, and it could happen again. The second week of May, there are a lot of events on May 10th specifically. Mercury will turn retrograde at 4 degrees Gemini, and so the 3-ish weeks of Mercury retrograde start now, and they play out in Gemini and Taurus. There could be some kind of communication retooling during this period, a change in perhaps educational aims or school aims, or standards during this period of back and forth. As you well know, whatever starts out happening on the beginning part of a Mercury retrograde may have to undergo some revisions or changes during the Mercury retrograde until it's finalized, and that could take possibly the full 3-week period. The same day, May 10th, Jupiter will enter Aries, which is definitely one of the most important events of May. Jupiter now takes on a warlike role and will become an indicator for matters that are involved with war, something we've had plenty of this year. Jupiter is no longer in major dignity, as he was in Pisces, and even though he comes back to Pisces for a while at year's end, most of the rest of the year has Jupiter in Aries. Jupiter can show where groups of people or nations seek to get emotional rewards, and this changes as Jupiter changes signs. So now that Jupiter is leaving Pisces, there's less focus on people's well-being and humanitarianism, which was, again, Jupiter and Pisces themes, and there's more of a focus on getting good feelings from things like pride, aggression, military events, national honor, and so forth. The same day, May 10th, Jupiter will conjoin the Aries ingress Sun, of course, which is at 0 degrees Aries. And this could be interesting. It could be indicative of a public figure or authority figure receiving some great boon, freedom, or some kind of reward. It's generally a positive aspect, if frankly bombastic. Now, May 12th, Mercury undergoes his evening set at 4 degrees Gemini. So communications are secret and hidden now, because when Mercury goes under the beams of the sun, Mercury becomes invisible due to the glare of the sun's rays. So until Mercury emerges from the sun's beams later as a morning star, there will be secret discussions and deals that we don't hear about possibly until much later. May 15th is the date of the total lunar eclipse at 25 degrees Scorpio. This eclipse is ruled by Mars in Pisces, and Mars in Pisces is trine and sextile the eclipse itself. Saturn squares the eclipse axis, which to me suggests a heavy, repressive element and seriousness as well. We could be dealing with some kind of past tragedy where we need to find a way forward. This eclipse is mostly visible in the Americas, North and South, so this region is the most likely to be impacted. I will be releasing a video about this eclipse, but it's important to note that this one also has earthquake potential, so it's an important lunation to watch. Now, the third full week of May starts with May 17th, Mars conjoining Neptune at 25 Pisces. This in the past has coincided with naval or other water disasters like flooding. It's often also associated with a flood of mass deception or propaganda being released, and in the past few years, this combination was linked to a lot of fear-mongering around LGBTQ rights. Now, May 20th, Sun will enter Gemini. This is not a huge transit, but it is worth noting because, of course, the Sun acts as an activator of other slower-moving aspects. So with the Sun leaving Taurus and entering Gemini, it takes some pressure off of the fixed signs, since Saturn and Uranus are transiting fixed signs right now. Now, May 21st, the Sun will conjoin Mercury retrograde at 0 Gemini, and this is an inferior conjunction of the Sun and Mercury. Mercury automatically becomes a morning star now because he will start rising before the Sun, and when he does that, he prefers to share information more openly, and he does not hide his feelings and thoughts very much. This can coincide with a period of business leading the government or authorities in some way because, again, Mercury is walking before the king, if you will. So there could be something that the government has to respond to that was initiated on the business side. May 22nd, right after this, Mercury will enter Taurus as a retrograde planet. Mercury is, of course, a lot more quiet in earthy Taurus than in Gemini, and he corresponds more to business activity rather than just pure communication, as he does in Gemini. I would expect important business and financial news during Mercury's return to Taurus. Now, the fourth week of May, with May 24th, we get Mars entering Aries, which is always an important event, certainly Mars changing signs, and we take extra note when he enters one of his own signs. Mars becomes a lot more confrontational in Aries. He's in his own domicile, of course, so he's considerably more Mars-like overtly because this is the diurnal sign, so everything happens on the surface, the aggression, the intensity. Although I wouldn't say Mars is necessarily better behaved in this sign. Just for comparison, last time Mars entered Aries was June 28th, 2020, and he stayed there for about 6 months because he was retrograde there as well. And what a special 6 months that was. The good news is that Mars is only in Aries for about 6 weeks this time. It's certainly an aggressive, violent, and I think seditious atmosphere when we're talking about the collective impact. This doesn't refer to Mars and Aries individuals. I'm thinking about it more collectively on a mundane level. And so I think we're going to get definitely a rise in temperature that we kind of got used to not having with Mars in Pisces, Mars in Aquarius, and even Mars in Capricorn. May 28th, Venus will enter Taurus, which is a lovely change for Venus because she's entering one of her own signs, and she's therefore very strengthened. And you can see how Venus has a bit of a roller coaster ride. She starts out the month in Pisces in her exaltation, she falls down into her detriment for about a month, and then at the end of the month, she's back in her own domicile, she's in Taurus, she's very strong. This is a great moment for empowering women and people in the arts. Certainly professional artists can always get a lift from Venus being very dignified. It's always an opportunity for Venusian progress, women's rights and things like that. Now, May 29th is the other, I think, very important aspect of May, which is Mars conjoining Jupiter at 3 degrees Aries. This is, again, key, I think. And as I discussed in my video about Jupiter's journey in 2022, which you can find on YouTube, this aspect can bring liberation from war, and in the past, it aligned with various countries emerging from military dictatorships. It also ended some long-term standoffs, which got resolved sometimes years later, just as Mars conjoined Jupiter. Often we will see actions that are both military and intended to be judicial or restorative in some way. Sometimes this aspect coincides with reconciliation or truth-finding missions following things like military atrocities. On the weather side, this combination can also lead to major thunderstorms and tornadoes. Now, the last week of May, it's a partial week, we have May 30th, a new moon at 9 Gemini. Now, this new moon, of course, has Mercury as its ruler. What's interesting is that Mercury is retrograde in Taurus, conjoining the North Node. There is a real sense here of getting pulled into the world of illusion, not in the sense of untruth exactly, but in the sense of story, right? This is all about weaving stories. Who has the best story? Certainly there is a sense here of possible deception or self-deception, but I think what we will see here is a sense of going into a narrative from the past. And because the same day, Mercury also rises as a morning star at 26 Taurus, and Mercury is going to be conjoining the fixed star Algol, which has to do with violence, among other things, it could be that May 30th has to do with revisiting an act of violence, perhaps that had come to light where it was previously hidden. So we are revisiting past trauma now, and even though it's not pleasant, it's kind of like exhuming disturbing secrets that are determined to be told. It's not pleasant, it's not light, but it needs to be done. And I think the end of May is going to have an opportunity to have a very open conversation about some of these very difficult topics. So in summary, May is going to be one of the most important and eventful months of 2022. With Jupiter's change of signs, we feel we are moving into a new chapter now with a whole new focus. Certainly Mars changing signs as well, also going into Aries just like Jupiter. It adds punch, it adds intensity, it adds a lot of focus on Aries. In addition, the May 15th eclipse will likely add to the seriousness and a sense of gravity of this new tone. If you haven't yet watched my whole year 2022 forecast video to get the larger picture, check it out. And of course, you can always subscribe to the Nina Griffin channel on YouTube so that you can get notified of new videos as they are released. All right, thanks for watching.